lost my car and my home. I'm leaving for a destination I still don't know. Somewhere nobody must have duties at all. And if you like this, you can follow me. So let's go. Follow me. And let's go to the place where we belong and leave our troubles at home. Come with me. We can go to that paradise of love. Enjoy a destination unknown. No, 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 destination unknown.
I'll tell you what I want, what I really, really want. I'll tell you what I want, what I really, really want. I want a reform win. Yeah. I know that sounded corny, but I'm on a Union Jack and I'm young enough to remember the Spice Girls. I started this journey and my wife said to me, she said, if you want to give your time, brilliant. But just remember, you're like everybody else out there, we haven't got spare cash. Yeah. So we tried to get venues for today, and to be fair to the team out there, we worked our socks off. It shows you in politics something I didn't even know existed until I decided to put my head above the parapet and give it a go. To stand up for every person in society, like my nan used to say to me, you've got a good head and a good heart, use them. Because that's what we need. Maidstone has been failed since the days of Anne Widdecombe, left us for the shores of the West Country. But we're lucky because she's still here in spirit. She's coming with me next Saturday to go and do a tour to just remind people what a constituency MP's about. So it's not just about the national politics. Yes, that's very important. But in Maidstone, and especially in Kent, and there's a lot of the candidates are down there today, and with brain frogs being stood up here in front of you all for the first time, I will never remember all of their names. So they know who they are, please do talk to them, but going back to the point of where the other parties are trying to totally destroy what we're trying to do, they trolled all of the events we tried to get to. So there was a charity that could have really desperately used this cash today, but we decided, with all the trolling going on, it was not fair to put them into the highlight. So without anything else I'm really wanted to talk about today, that's one subject you need to consider is the politicians need to be honest. I've said to all of my team, that's what I've built my life on. And don't let the buggers destroy it, because it is wrong. All of these actions people are taking out there across our county and across our town, and you break it down. I've represented businesses as only a small business myself, for Maidstone, for the county and for the southeast of England. And when you see the barriers, the bureaucracy, the wasted money that goes on, and it can be so simply achieved, and it can be achieved tomorrow, if you really want to. You go and talk to a lot of these, as I did up in Parliament, where you actually discuss the housing issues. And they all agree the issues, but then they go and create barriers. And it's quite simple. Forget about the masses coming over. 300,000 houses a year was the target that we needed. We've only achieved that once during the Second World War, since the Second World War. And yet there's more to come into it. All of the policies that we've got within our contract with you, read them. They're so interconnected and they're so common sense, and they can be delivered. And what's more, you add to that a proper MP. Forget the fact of politicians. People keep asking me, are you going to be a politician? No. But I'll be a damn good MP. If you just look at some of the things that are going on, our motorways aren't ours. And that's because money disappeared, because Cameron lost his bottle and took the money away from our lorry park so that we could actually keep our infrastructure running. You'll hear the Lib Dems telling you about, oh, we're going to do stuff about the sewerage and the water. They're my local council now, along with the Greens. The first thing they did, and two of them are candidates that sit on the borough council, to actually form the leadership, they put their own personal needs ahead of everybody else's by creating 2 new cabinet positions at a cost of around £24,000. So what does that actually say to you as a voter and a constituent, that they do that for their own needs rather than actually what is it we need? The water isn't running in a lot of things. You've heard our MP, who's woefully inadequate. Yeah, she's claimed she sorted it. All of their claims, just go through their paperwork and go back 14 years and you'll find it's achieved net zero. And that's what you're going to get with the other candidates. I know I've got my faults, I know I've got my failings, but I promise you all, none of you will get left behind. If you take a 2-minute walk from your house or your property and you see what people are living in, and then you have the audacity to hear other people are giving priority to better houses and they get taken more seriously than people that have worked and grafted for ages. So you can say, yes, Paul, you've called yourself a label, you're now right wing, but hands up. My belief is you create wealth and income to pay for things. You don't keep kicking people when they're down. If we don't release money to people, allow people to live rather than exist, and if you walk and you notice people on the streets, that child trying to get to school and there's no safe route to school, or, as one family told me the other day, their child has got to get in a taxi 8 miles each way. And don't get me started on special needs in the county. It's appalling. And I know firsthand, because of my granddaughter that goes to a special school which the county are dumping on, and you've got people with learning difficulties being on a taxi for hours. I'm going to get told to wrap up before I get thrown off the bus, because I know you've all come to see me, really, because it's in Kent. But there is this young man, and I'll just keep an eye out for him, because I've forgotten what he looks like, because he hasn't been on telly much recently. So, if Nigel Farage, it's my honour to welcome you to my bus rather than your bus, and I'd like to thank the people in the front row for making it happen. So if you would like to look behind you, there's a young man coming in.
Maidstone. Welcome to the heart of the Garden of England on a beautiful midsummer's day. This constituency has very fond political memories for me because the Member of Parliament here from 1950 until 1987 was called Sir John Wells. And later on in life, Sir John came to see me. He'd been very pro the common market, very pro the EEC, and he came to see me late in life and said, I think I made a terrible mistake and I want to correct it. And Sir John joined me as a member of UKIP. So that was one good start. But then, of course, from 1987, somebody else was the Member of Parliament for Maidstone, and she's quite well known, isn't she? Famous for Strictly Come Dancing, famous for being unafraid of pretty much anything or anybody, and actually, I think she's something of a national treasure. And isn't it great that Anne Widdecombe is so pro-Reform UK? Now, this whole campaign, I've been talking about the things that matter in life. Family, community, and country. And so, I want to make a little announcement about family. Yesterday was June the 23rd, the 8th anniversary of Brexit. June the 23rd is Brexit Day. It's worthy of celebration. But it was also, yesterday, my first grandchild was born. I don't think I'm ever going to forget when his birthday is or when the Brexit anniversary is. You might have noticed that we're doing rather well. There is a momentum. We are the subject of conversation around the family breakfast table. There's more conversation about reform, about me, I guess, than there is anything else going on in this campaign. I guess that's partly because Sunak and Starmer are simply so monotone, so dull, so boring, and don't say anything particularly believable. But it's also because, as the new kids on the block, we've stunned everybody just how quickly we've leapt, and on Friday we saw the first opinion poll putting us on 20%, and it was the fourth poll in 3 days that had us lying in second place across the entire United Kingdom. Now, I remember back in 2014, when I led UKIP into the European elections, we were doing rather well. And suddenly, certain newspapers started to become pretty unpleasant. And it went on for week after week after week. And I got a letter in very spidery handwriting from a man who said, Dear Mr Farage, not yet, Dear Mr Farage, he said, I was in Bomber Command during World War II, and let me tell you, you only start taking heavy flak when you're getting near the target. I think you must be doing very well. And so it's been for the last few days. What appeared after the BBC interview with Nick Robinson. And by the way, I was alone. I was the only person in 2014 who said there will be a war in Ukraine. I can't take those words away, and nor would I want to. The fact that I was more far-sighted than the rest of our political leaders is not something that I'm going to apologise for. And yet this has been turned into Farage makes outrageous statement. Farage defends Putin. Well, I've done none of those things. I would never, ever defend Putin and think his behaviour in Ukraine and elsewhere has been reprehensible. But if we're going to think towards a peace at some time in the not too distant future, perhaps it might be helpful to understand what went wrong in the first place. Our leaders have no knowledge of history. Our leaders had no knowledge of Russian psychology. And none of this justifies what he's done. And who knows, he may have done it anyway, but we gave him to give his people a reason for doing so. And you think I'm on my own in thinking this? No, the Pope. The Pope in 2022, it's not often the Pope and I are on the same side of any debate particularly. I'm a bit more Henry VIII, you know. But the Pope made this point in 2022. George Kennan, who for years was Director of Policy in the US State Department, begged and urged the Clinton administration not to make the mistake of creeping ever eastwards. George Robertson, the former Secretary General of NATO, said a few months ago that the EU's accession agreement to Ukraine was a mistake that was used by Putin. But no, it's me. I'm the bad guy, and I'm all over the front page of the Daily Mail for daring to stand by what I said all those years ago. And overnight, their most famous columnist, no doubt their best paid columnist, a man called Boris Johnson, has said that I am morally repugnant for suggesting this might have been a causal factor in this appalling war that has now got perhaps nearly 1 million dead and wounded and shows no sign of changing. Well, let's have a little look at something, guys, shall we? Here is Boris Johnson. Daily Mail, are you watching? Here is Boris Johnson from 2016. This is what Boris said. Boris blames the European Union for war in Ukraine. The former mayor is called a Putin apologist after challenging Brussels expansionism. Well, perhaps it's Boris Johnson that's morally repugnant and not me, I don't know. But can you see the sheer level of hypocrisy? Can you see the nonsense of all of this? And let's be clear, this man will go down as the worst Prime Minister of modern times, a man who betrayed an 80-seat majority. Who opened the door to mass immigration? Boris Johnson. Who betrayed the will of Brexit voters? It was Boris Johnson. He pretended to be a Conservative, but he governed as a Green. He put in place net zero policies, including an ambition to turn 30% of our agricultural land into complete grow wild set aside. A net zero policy that meant the poorest in society had to pay too much. And I cannot stand the cant, the lies, the hypocrisy of these people who say thing one year and then completely change it the next. What you'll always get with me is thoughtful, considered, consistent political leadership. But perhaps something very important comes out of this attempt to somehow stitch me up, which, by the way, is not going to work. But perhaps something very important comes out of it, and maybe these are the most important things I'll say in the entire general election campaign. There has been virtually no debate on defence whatsoever, other than a ludicrous, we're going to bring back national service, which would only apply to 30,000 young people who would join the military for a year. There's been precious little debate on defence, precious little debate about the state of our armed forces, precious little debate about how little we still do in this country for our veterans. and precious, almost no debate on foreign policy. And I say these things this morning to you because I have no doubt that the world is in a more dangerous place right now than it's been at any point since the Cuban Missile Crisis over 60 years ago. A couple of years back, we would have thought war on a global scale was inconceivable. But we now all, don't we, harbour that doubt and that worry at the back of our minds. Since 2010, this Conservative government has relentlessly driven down the ability of our Army, our Air Force and our Navy. They have cut it back to the most stunning degree. We now have at 72,000 fewer soldiers than at any time since Queen Anne, and recruitment is going wrong. We only reached the 2% as demanded as a NATO member by fiddling the figures and putting our intelligence spending in with our military spending. We don't need 30,000 young men and women to do 1 year's training with the Army. We need 30,000 at least young men and women to join the Army, get trained and stay as full-time soldiers. And let's stop conning ourselves that somehow increasing expenditure to 2.5% by 2030, the Conservatives pledge, and Labour sort of matching it, let's not con ourselves that that's sufficient. It isn't. If there's one area where we need increased spending up to 3% of GDP, it is defence, and we need to do it as quickly as possible. And this matters because without the Americans, NATO is nothing. And the Americans increasingly think that we are not a serious player. They've always had the highest regard for all of our forces, especially, it has to be said, our special forces. But unless we start to build up our size, America will stop taking us seriously, NATO will stop taking us seriously, and the world will be a more dangerous place. You don't get peace through weakness. You get peace through strength. You get peace through deterrence, and that matters. I hardly need to tell you the catastrophic failures we've seen under President Biden. The withdrawal from Afghanistan, the handing of it back over to the Taliban after 20 years was the sign of weakness that was seen by Putin, the sign of weakness that is increasingly being seen by China, or China, as a friend of mine calls it. And of course it was the Abraham Accords, those incredible series of deals that were done between Israel and Arab states, something that happened towards the end of the last presidential term, something that Saudi Arabia was about to join, that has led directly to the attacks that we've seen on October the 7th and the awful things that are going on in the Middle East ever since. We have a war in Ukraine. We have a war in the Middle East. And who knows, potentially China will go for Taiwan. This is a very dangerous cocktail. And foreign policy matters. And I will not be lectured. I will not be lectured to with the Daily Mail. And I will not be lectured to with the Conservative Party. And least of all, I will not be lectured to by Sir Keir Starmer. Starmer, who chose to weigh in against me over the weekend. This is the same Starmer that backed Corbyn, a man that wanted us to leave NATO. So no thank you. This the same Starmer that wants to reopen the inquiries that go back 50 years against British soldiers in Northern Ireland. And this the Starmer, along with David Lammy, who wants us to join the European Defence Union. He wants us to get closer with the European Union in terms of our military strategy, which would be a disaster as far as America and NATO are concerned. So I'll take no lectures from any of them. And just think what they've done. Think of the lies we were given over going to war in Iraq. Plain, outright lies, but supported by the Labour Party and supported by the Conservative Party at massive cost to us and the loss of hundreds of thousands of lives in Iraq. And think of the total stupidity of Cameron and at the time Sarkozy deciding that a war in Libya was a good idea. And I opposed Iraq publicly, and I opposed Libya very publicly. The result of the Libyan war has been the creation of ISIS. They didn't even exist before the Libyan war, and no boats were crossing the Mediterranean, no boats were crossing the Mediterranean until the Libyan war, with now at least a couple of million who have crossed, and some of those, as we speak, have come up through the continent and are making their way to us via small dinghies in this country. And this, a Labour and Conservative Party that appeased Iran, freed up tens of billions of dollars for Iran, that has led to Iran funding Hamas, Hezbollah and all of those terrorist groups. We've been led by governments who seem to think that going to war is a bad thing. Well, my voice in Parliament and my voice in the country will be that we need stronger defences, a better union with NATO. But we only go to war as a very, very last extreme. I will campaign for peace wherever it is possible. Now, the row around me, let's hope it does lead to that debate on foreign policy and defence. I hope perhaps I've kicked something off this morning. But of course, it's all been acting as a very useful distraction for the Conservative Party, who seem to, these days, resemble something of an organised betting ring. The sheer level of greed and stupidity that leads people right at the heart of government, who know when the election's going to be called, to put on bets, is astonishing, but perhaps sums up the self-entitled view that this Conservative Party has after 14 years in government. There's been a fifth person named this morning, but I'll bet you that's the tip of the iceberg, because all we've seen is the Betfair data, because it's available online. I wonder how many people were running into betting shops with 100 quid, 200 quid, 500 quid. This scandal will get worse. But I hear that Rishi Sunak is on the verge of doing something very decisive about it. I understand this afternoon he'll announce that we're leaving the Gambling Commission. And all of it, of course, is the most massive distraction from what should be the single biggest issue in this general election. I scarcely need to tell you that the British population has risen by 10 million since Tony Blair came to power. 6 million of that since the Conservatives came to power. Blair opened the door to mass unskilled labour in a way we'd never even approached anything like in the entirety of our history. And all the Conservatives have done, despite Boris's promises, is to actually increase it. Net migration, which ran from the late 1940s until nearly the millennium at 30 to 40,000 a year, is now running at nearly 750,000 a year. And yes, this should be the main topic of conversation, because the impact of that population increase is being seen on our infrastructure. It's being seen with the traffic on our roads. It's pretty obvious, isn't it? But it's also giving a younger generation an almost impossible situation. Rents have risen by 20 to 30% since 2021. It's simple demand, supply. And so our young people who go to work find themselves spending over half their income simply on rent. And they rent or live with their parents because houses are simply unaffordable for virtually everybody. Getting on the housing ladder, unless you've got wealthy parents, is now an impossible dream. And think about this. Just because of the levels of net legal migration, we have to build a new home every 2 minutes in this country. Just think of the number of new builds all over Kent. They're springing up everywhere, aren't they? And yet they're not even meeting demand for net migration, let alone the shortages that exist. And the sheer absurdity of British-born people going in many parts of this country to the back of the queue when it comes to social housing in favour of those who just arrived, I hardly need to tell you. So we're perfectly clear. We want an immigration policy where people come and people go, of course. And there are certainly many, many, many good, skilled people that come to Britain and give us a great benefit. But one of the problems of mass immigration on this scale hasn't just been the cost, hasn't just been the fact that it's making British people poorer, which it is, hasn't just been the impact on housing, but also the massive impact on the NHS. They tell us we can't survive without foreign doctors and nurses. And yet I've good evidence of the government paying NHS trusts £1,000 bonus a time to take on foreign nurses when British nurses that have just graduated haven't got jobs, and I've got some strong documentary evidence to back that up. I've had letters from people in Kent whose sons and daughters have achieved 3 A's at A-level but can't get into medical school because we cap the numbers of people that go to medical school because we seem to be happier to import doctors and nurses, often from poor African countries where, frankly, they need the nurses and doctors even more than we do. And of course, you can't get a new GP appointment because there are simply too many people. And everywhere you look, you see 300 houses built on the side of this town, 500 on the side of that town. Does it come with a new GP surgery? Absolutely never. So these are the things we should be talking about, and we think a freeze on overall immigration numbers for the next few years would make sense, give us half a chance to catch up, and what's amazing are the number of dependents that come. 125,000 people have come as dependents of students. I can't work it out either. And even of those who've come on work permits, the same number again have come as dependents. So we must be clear, like most sensible countries in the world, no entitlement to any benefits until you've been here for 5 years, paid your taxes and obeyed our law. And none of this is about disliking anybody. The vast majority of those that come to our country are very, very good people and often very hard-working. We just cannot live with these numbers, and we've got to start putting the interests of our own people and our own country first. But the issue I've found going all over the country, the issue that inflames people, and very often people who've come here legally as migrants, is what is happening as I speak in the English Channel. Remember, I went out 4 years ago, again and again into the Channel, to highlight what was going on, to say you might as well put a sign on the White Cliffs of Dover saying everyone welcome. We'd stop deporting people, something we were doing under Tory and Labour governments for decades. We'd stopped doing it. We'd lost our nerve. We were too frightened of a human rights court in Strasbourg. After all, it took us 10 years to deport Abu Qatada. That's the extent to which we've lost the ability to control our own borders and to choose who should stay in our country. Well, I warned that huge numbers would come. I even said there might be an invasion, which of course is the rudest word you could possibly use in BBC land. But now 4,000 boats and 128,000 people later, it does look like it's been an invasion to me. And it's mostly young men. It's 91% men who are coming from countries that are known to have terrorism, coming from countries with gang culture, coming from war zones in which many of them have been directly engaged and brutalised. These are not refugees in any normal sense of the term. And all of this has happened under the Conservatives' watch, despite promise after promise from every Prime Minister and from every Home Secretary that they would deal with it. But of course they won't. Rishi called this election because he knew the planes were not going to Rwanda. He knew it. But he told us it's okay. We've detained people. They've all been rounded up. They're in detention, waiting to go. Well, do you know that every single one of those has now been released on bail and most have absconded? No planes were going to Rwanda. So we are clear. This country must leave the European Court of Human Rights and get back its sovereignty. We must make clear that we're a very generous country. We've given refugee status to 500,000 people since 2016 alone. We're generous. We're not mean-spirited or nasty, but we need to make clear that nobody that comes via this route will ever get refugee status, and to tell the French that having given them £500 million, their navy must stop escorting dinghies across the English Channel and handing them over to Border Force, and if necessary, we will pick up people in those boats and under the law of the sea, we'll take them back to the French beaches if that is what we have to do. So wherever I go, and I'm going to be in Newton Abbot in Devon this evening, and we call these events with 24 hours notice and people come along, I sense we're doing very, very well. I sense we're doing well in Maidstone. I sense we're doing well across this country. And if you take out London and Scotland, we're now comfortably ahead of the Conservatives in second place right across this country. People will realise when they sit down this Sunday for their breakfast, they'll realise it really is over, that Starmer is going to win this election. And so the question is, who will provide a voice of opposition? Will it be Rishi Sunak? No, because he'll be in California, won't he? Would it be a Conservative Party that is split down the middle and divided and spends more time fighting each other than fighting for the country? No chance. But what I can do is I can lead opposition, not just in Parliament, but out in the country. Michel Barnier has let the cat out of the bag overnight. He said that if Keir Starmer wants to get closer to European single market rules, the cost is we must reopen free movement. So let's think about this. 8 years on from Brexit, Starmer wants to join the European Defence Union. Starmer will have to sign up to free movement to get what he wants in his manifesto, us closer to the single market. And of the 6 key priorities that Starmer has laid out for Labour in this general election, legal and illegal immigration aren't even mentioned. He intends to do nothing. And I believe this Labour government will get into trouble very, very quickly. They'll prove to be, what if it's possible, even more incompetent than the Conservatives have been. And as he tries to take us back, towards EU rules, as we get more lunacy on trans laws and everything else, you'll find a government and a parliament split from its people. So my ambition is for us to establish a bridgehead in Parliament on July the 4th, and over the course of the next 5 years to build up a mass movement for common sense, for decency to represent the silent majority in this country. Are you with us? Are you going to help us? Are we going to succeed on